And they can do that by picking up the amount of oxygen in the vessels. So if you have a very active, for me to be speaking to you now, my motor speech area is firing. It will have much more oxygen going through it than the area where I'm supposed to be sleeping, right? So that's for functional MNR, and I'll give one more PET. PET is positron emission tomography. Positron emission tomography. Emission it should be, excuse me. Emission tomography. So those of you who are in bioengineering are interested in these pieces of equipment, designing better ones so we can get better images of our anatomy. And in PET, you're using radioactive material to localize radioactive material to localize whatever you're looking for. I'll just leave it at that. How many's had a PET scan? No, one. Was it glucose? Glucose, what radioactivity did they give you? You don't know? No, you'll find out. Then you tell us, all right? Then we all learn. No, if you find things that you know we don't know, we're a class, right? We talk. So now we have structural planes and directions. We're going through this at a superficial but rapid rate. And it's important to know the terms for positions so you can tell relationships of structures one to another. You will learn these directions in the body. So let's call these, what terms did we use to give this group? We call it structural planes and directions. First, we have to know the anatomical position of the body that we're going to be referring to. So the anatomical position of the body is face forward, palms forward. So when we start doing relationships, we have to be in this position, not this position, not this position, but face forward, palms forward. The anatomical position. And as we learn, you'll see why this is so important. Face forward and palms up. So let's make a cartoon. Head, neck, shoulders, trunk. Arm out here. Give the general idea. If we make a line straight through the body, that's called a midline cut. Midline. And if we're talking about a structure that's going to be here versus a structure that's going to be here, we will say that A is medial to B. It's closer to the midline. A is medial to B. And we will say that B is lateral to A. B is lateral to A. So if you're describing some of the GI tract and you've got the tissues that you want to be talking about, you use medial and lateral to help orient you. Then we use the terms proximal and distal. Proximal and distal. And this part of my body is the trunk. These are my extremities. So proximal is closer to the trunk. Closer to trunk. Distal then is away from trunk. So these are terms we'll be using all the time with these appendages that we attach to this trunk. So if I have a C here at the shoulder and a D down here, I will say that C is proximal to the midline. D, which would be out here, is distal to the midline. When we go to put on muscles, we're going to have insertions and origins. You're going to have the insertions are proximal. Excuse me, the origin is proximal, the insertion is distal. So we'll be using these terms all the time. I have a few slides I'd like to show. I have a few words, but I'll cover those later. But let's try to review some of the things we've said with slides each day. Whoops. Do I have my pointer? Is this it? They get fancier and smaller all the time. Let's see what this does. This may be a clock. It may be a radio. I don't know. We'll see. There we go. It's got one. All right. We had mentioned an artery. This we'll learn. Our thoracic aorta coming down. This is as we'll see it from a structural point of view. This is gross anatomy of this vessel. If we look at it histologically, we look at the next slide. This is what it looks like histologically. We look at its wall. This is its opening where the blood flows, but this is its wall. These wavy little things are what we call elastic fibers. Every time your heart contracts, your blood vessels coming from it will expand, and then they recoil. So we'll get the principle of what's going on by looking at the gross structure and then the microscopic structure to understand the dynamics at this level. In the next slide. Now, we were talking about medial and lateral. Does anybody know what muscle this is? Pectoralis major. Well, this will be the origin. It's medial. It's close to the midline. It will insert over here on the humerus, which is distal. Here's your deltoid. It originates here. That's closer to the midline. And will insert down here. So we need to know medial, lateral, proximal, distal. This is closer, this is proximal, distal. So we'll be using these terms all the time in bones, muscles, and so forth. In the next one. Well, this is a bone. Would you call it a long bone or a short bone? Good for you. It's a long bone. When you look at the femur, you know that's really a long bone, but the characteristics of it are the same. Short bones have different characteristics from long bones. So I put this one in just to show you that these metacarpals forming the palm of your hand These are long bones, but now if you want to look at a beautiful picture, look at them histologically. Next one. Isn't that gorgeous? The art of science. That's one reason I loved anatomy, because I like the art. But this is taking a section through that bone, and this is what you have millions of these in your long bones. With the blood vessel here, the bone cells here, they've got to get nutrients. Some people think that anatomy is dead. In our class where we go off and teach the little kids, kindergarten to 7th grade, we tell them to teach their parents. So this little kid went home and told his mother that bones were alive. Mother said, no, they're not. So a little kid came crying back and said to my student, you told me wrong. So we had to Xerox out of the book so the parent could see that bones are alive. Very much alive. They grow with use. They shrink with disuse. Muscles grow with use, shrink with disuse. What other structure, very important structure, grows with use and shrinks with disuse? The one in the hot box. That's why we teach. Now, here's a picture cut through the skull. Have you ever seen your body like this before? Isn't that an interesting trip? You can imagine, look this evening, open your mouth, look in your mirror, go back and see your uvula. Know that if you go through your vertebral column, you'll come to the spinal cord. Then you go up your spinal cord and imagine your cerebellum, your pons, all your brain structures, your big corpus callosum. We're going to learn all of this. But see, it took a dead body to get this picture. Let's look at an NMR. Next one. They do pretty well, don't they? This is when we call them MRIs, magnetic resonance imaging. It's the same, but it's a sagittal section through. Here's your corpus callosum, just as you saw it with death. Here's the cerebellum. Here's the pons. Here is the spinal cord. Isn't that good? But they're trying to improve the resolution at all times. But they've done very well at the present time. So that, I think, gives you an introduction